There are many unsolved mysteries that force us to rethink everything we know about the past. For centuries, we have been writing the history of humanity based on archaeological finds that seem obvious and indisputable to us. But what if these obvious facts are just the tip of the iceberg? What if there are traces hidden in the depths of centuries that could completely rewrite the history of the settlement of the continents? Today we will talk about one of the most mysterious discoveries of recent times. In Australia, on the shore of an ancient dried-up lake, footprints were found. But it is not the discovery itself that is unusual, but its age. Scientists say that these traces may be more than 100,000 years old. If this is true, it means that humans came to this continent much earlier than is commonly believed. Perhaps they were not Homo sapiens at all, but some other ancient population. Perhaps the Australian continent, which we are accustomed to considering the last point on the migration map, was one of the first to be settled. Perhaps the history of humanity is much more complex and confusing than we imagine. Watch the video to the end to find out how this discovery could change our understanding of ancient history. The Australian archaeological community was abuzz with news coming from the northwest of the country. In 2017, a group of researchers discovered numerous footprints on the shore of an ancient dried-up lake in the Archaeological region. At first glance, this was a common but impressive find, as the footprints were very well preserved. But when the first studies were conducted, the scientists could not believe their eyes. It turned out that these footprints could be up to 120,000 years old. If the dating is correct, this overturns the entire modern history of the settlement of Australia. Until now, it was believed that humans did not arrive on the continent until 65,000 years ago. Suddenly, this discovery pushed the date back almost 60,000 years. However, it should be noted that this dating is not direct. Scientists use the optically stimulated luminescence method, which allows them to determine when the quartz grains in the sand were last exposed to sunlight. This method dated the layer of sediment in which the traces were found, rather than the footprints themselves. The results showed an age ranging from 105,000 to 120,000 years. This impressive time interval was the main reason for scientific skepticism. In geological and archaeological research, especially in areas with a high degree of erosion, there is always a risk that artifacts could have been moved from later layers to older ones as a result of natural processes. But who left these footprints? It is believed that the only species of human that could have reached Australia at that time was Homo sapiens. But Homo sapiens left Africa only 70,000 years ago. This means that these footprints could have been left not by them, but by some other ancient population unknown to us. The footprints bear mysterious features that do not fit any of the ancient human families known to us. For example, one of the footprints belongs to a teenager, and it was surprisingly large, indicating a strong physique and possibly a skeleton different from that of modern humans. Morphological analysis of the footprints themselves, including the ratio of foot length to width and the nature of the stride, also raises questions. They differ from the footprints that would have been left by typical Homo sapiens of that period. Thus, we are faced with an intriguing dilemma. Either the dating is incorrect and the footprints belong to a later population of Homo sapiens, or they were indeed left 120,000 years ago and belong to another, as yet unknown species. This discovery forces us to rethink the entire chronology of human migration and consider how much we really know about our own history. What do you think? Write your opinion in the comments, because our history may depend on it. The scientific community has reacted to this sensational discovery with a great deal of skepticism. The main stumbling block is, of course, the dating. How can we be sure that these footprints are really 120,000 years old? A team of archaeologists led by Steve Webb from Flinders University used the optically stimulated luminescence method to determine the age of the sediments in which the footprints were found. This method measures the time that has elapsed since the grains of sand in the deposits were last exposed to sunlight. The results showed an age ranging from 105,000 to 120,000 years. But skeptics have their own arguments. They claim that the dating method may be inaccurate, or that the footprints could have been left in later layers, but ended up in older ones as a result of geological processes such as erosion or soil displacement. In fact, the history of archaeology has many examples of sensational finds turning out to be false. But what if this time it's not the case? What if these footprints really are 120,000 years old? To appreciate the scale of this discovery, let's take a look at the evolutionary picture of that period. About 120,000 years ago, there were several species of hominins on our planet. Homo sapiens dominated Africa, already established as a species but not yet beginning large-scale migration. Neanderthals and Denisovans reigned supreme in Eurasia, while the last populations of Homo erectus may still have existed in East Asia. In other words, several species coexisted on Earth at the same time, each with its own unique characteristics. Later, Homo sapiens began their great dispersal, arriving in Asia about 70,000 years ago and reaching Australia about 65,000 years ago. Thus, if the footprints were indeed left 120,000 years ago, it means that they were created at a time when Homo sapiens had not yet left Africa in large numbers. This contradicts the conventional model, which states that only Homo sapiens possess the technology and abilities necessary for sea travel to Australia. It turns out that during this period, someone else, perhaps less technologically advanced, was able to overcome the water barrier. This completely overturns our understanding of ancient migrations and the abilities of archaic hominids. But skeptics have their own arguments. They claim that the dating method may be inaccurate, or that the footprints could have been left in later layers, but ended up in older ones as a result of geological processes such as erosion or soil displacement. In fact, the history of archaeology has many examples of sensational discoveries that turned out to be false. But what if this time it's not the case? What if these footprints are really 120,000 years old? What stage of human evolution was it at during that period? Let's talk about it now. If we accept the 120,000 year date as accurate, who could have left these footprints? The most obvious candidate is Homo erectus, or upright man. This species is known to have migrated from Africa to Asia more than 1.8 million years ago. They existed in Asia for an incredibly long time, until 100,000 years ago, and possibly even longer. If Homo erectus reached Java, there is no reason why they could not have crossed Wallacea and reached Australia. But there is another, more unlikely version. Perhaps these traces belong to the last representatives of some extinct species that is still unknown to science. In Asia, for example, traces of Denisovans have been found. And in Indonesia, on the island of Flores, the remains of Homo floresiensis, nicknamed hobbits, were found. They are approximately 50,000 years old, which suggests that they lived at the same time as Homo sapiens. Therefore, it is quite possible that a unique population could have existed on the Australian continent. Thus, these footprints could belong to an unknown species of hominins who came to the continent before Homo sapiens. This hypothesis is supported by the fact that on Java, just a few hundred kilometers from Australia, the last representatives of Homo erectus lived approximately 117,000, 108,000 years ago. This coincides with the possible dating of the Australian footprints. Moreover, recent discoveries in Southeast Asia have shown that other archaic species lived on the islands, such as Homo luzonensis in the Philippines, estimated to be approximately 67,000 years old. All of this indicates that the region was home to a kaleidoscope of ancient human populations. If these hominins were able to colonize island ecosystems, it is quite possible that some of them could have made the final, most daring journey to the Sahul continent. The traces found in Australia may be the only evidence of the existence of such a population. The biggest problem associated with this discovery is the question of migration. If humans did indeed reach Australia 120,000 years ago, how did they do it? Even at the lowest sea level during the Ice Age, Australia and New Guinea formed a single continent called Sahul, but it was separated from Asia by deep water channels. These channels could only have been crossed with the aid of some kind of watercraft. Modern research suggests that Homo sapiens most likely used primitive boats to reach Australia 65,000 years ago. But could other, more primitive species, such as Homo erectus, have built boats? Perhaps they reached the continent by accident, drifting on rafts of vegetation washed away by storms. But even if they did reach Australia, they left no traces behind except for these footprints. Why? Perhaps their population was too small to leave any archaeological evidence behind. Or perhaps their traces simply have not been found. this question remains unanswered. It is commonly believed that only Homo sapiens had sufficient cognitive development to create the complex technologies necessary to colonize new continents. However, recent discoveries challenge this assumption. Evidence has been found in Asia that Homo erectus used fire more than 1 million years ago and also created fairly complex stone tools. If they could master these technologies, it is entirely possible that they could have mastered seafaring as well. This would be a huge step in evolution, forcing us to take a fresh look at the abilities of our ancestors. Thus, the traces in Australia may be evidence that Homo erectus was much more advanced than we imagined. What does science know about the technologies and culture of ancient humans? Don't switch off this video to find out the answer to this question. If we assume that these footprints were left by another population unknown to us, it raises many questions about their culture and technology. We are used to thinking that only Homo sapiens was advanced enough to explore new territories and create complex tools. But what if that's not the case? Perhaps these ancient people possessed primitive but effective technologies that allowed them to survive in the harsh conditions of Australia. Perhaps their culture was completely different from what we imagine. The footprints found in Australia give us only a small glimpse of what these people were like. They were large, with big feet, which may indicate a strong build. Unfortunately, we cannot learn anything more about them. But one thing we know for sure, they were smart enough to survive and leave these traces behind. Perhaps these archaic hominins used other materials to make tools that have not survived to this day, such as wood or bone. This would explain the absence of stone tools, which we usually look for. Perhaps their adaptation to the harsh conditions of Australia was so specific that their technologies are simply beyond our understanding. They may have developed unique methods of hunting or gathering food that did not require sophisticated stone tools. For example, they may have used spears with burnt tips or created traps from plant fibers. All of this forces us to rethink our attitude toward ancient people and their capabilities. We are accustomed to judging them by the few artifacts we have managed to find, but perhaps the most important thing is what we have not found. This reminds us how fragile and incomplete our picture of the past is. Despite all the intriguing details, most scientists still adhere to a conservative point of view. They believe that these footprints belong to Homo sapiens and that the 120,000-year-old date is incorrect. They argue that the footprints could have been left in later layers, but ended up in older ones as a result of geological processes such as erosion or soil displacement. Another argument against early migration is that no other archaeological evidence has been found anywhere in Australia to support this theory. There are no tools, no bone remains, and no traces of fire pits. And if people really lived on the continent for tens of thousands of years, they would have left some traces behind. If we stick to this point of view, everything falls into place. But then another question arises. Why did the dating show 120,000 years? This mystery compels us to take a closer look at the dating method itself. The optically stimulated luminescence method, although considered reliable, has its limitations. It gives the age not of the artifact itself, but of the last solar exposure of the quartz grains in which it was found. In unstable geological conditions, such as those found at the ancient lake where the footprints were discovered, it is possible that younger footprints were carried into older layers of sediment. In addition, no other traces of human activity, such as tools or bone remains, have been found on the continent that could confirm the presence of an ancient population. This is a serious contradiction that prevents us from stating with complete certainty that humans lived in Australia 120,000 years ago. However, this does not mean that we should completely ignore this finding. It serves as a powerful stimulus for further research and may force us to rethink our methods of studying the past. Why did the dating show 120,000 years? And what will we be able to learn about this in the future? Stay with us to find out the answer to this question. To solve this mystery, additional research is needed. Modern technologies such as high-resolution CT scanning and virtual 3D modeling can help us obtain more accurate information about the footprints. We could digitally flatten the footprints, restoring them to their original shape, and compare them with the footprints of other hominins known to us. Such work could show whether the archaic echoes are real or illusory. It is also necessary to conduct new research at the site of the discovery. Perhaps other, more ancient footprints are hidden in deeper layers of soil that will help us solve this mystery. This requires enormous effort and financial investment, but it is worth it. If we want to unravel the mystery of this discovery, we need to apply all the technologies available to us. In addition to imaging techniques, geochemical analysis will be a key tool in future research. Studying the chemical composition of the footprints and the sediments surrounding them can provide invaluable information. For example, the presence of specific carbon and nitrogen isotopes in the footprints can tell us about the diet of the creatures that left them. This would allow us to determine whether they were primarily hunters or gatherers and compare their diet with that of ancient populations known to us. In addition, new radiocarbon dating methods, which can work with minimal amounts of organic material, may also shed light on the true age of the footprints. These advanced methods will allow us to go beyond speculation and obtain solid scientific data. Ultimately, only a multidisciplinary approach combining geology, paleoanthropology, and advanced technology will be able to provide a definitive answer to this question. If we look at other finds that have been made in Australia, we see that they support the theory of late settlement. For example, the remains of Denisovans were found in Denisova Cave in Altai, and the remains of the Talga skull, which may be up to 13,000 years old, were found in Talga Cave in Australia. These findings suggest that humans arrived on the continent much later than 120,000 years ago. But as we have already said, this does not rule out the possibility that there were earlier migrations. And if we assume that these traces are indeed 120,000 years old, it means that the Australian continent was settled twice, first by some ancient population, and then much later by Homo sapiens. This idea of double migration is gaining more and more supporters. For example, genetic studies show that modern Aborigines of Australia and New Guinea have traces of DNA that do not belong to Neanderthals or Denisovans, but may be remnants of another unknown species of hominins. This is the so-called unknown archaic gene, which may have been introduced into their genome as a result of interbreeding. If this is the case, then the footprints at Archaeological may be physical evidence of this long-forgotten branch of human evolution that colonized Australia long before our ancestors. Thus, these footprints become not just a mystery, but a potential key to understanding the complex and multi-layered history of the settlement of our world. If these footprints really belong to an ancient population, what happened to them? Did they die out? Or did they mix with Homo sapiens when they arrived on the continent? The latter option is not so unlikely. Genetic research has shown that Homo sapiens interbred with Neanderthals and Denisovans. Therefore, it is quite possible that a similar scenario occurred in Australia. If so, it means that modern Australian Aborigines may carry the genes of some ancient population unknown to us. Studying their DNA could give us the answer to this question, but it also raises many ethical issues. Recent genetic studies have shown that some modern populations in Oceania, including the Aboriginal Australians and Papuans of New Guinea, have about 4 to 6% Denisovan DNA. This is direct evidence that our ancestors interbred with these archaic hominins. But more than that, some scientists suggest that their genome may also contain traces of another ancient population, as yet unknown to us, which they have named the unknown archaic gene. These genes may be remnants of an ancient migration that took place long before the arrival of Homo sapiens. If this hypothesis is correct, then the traces in our cairn may be physical evidence of the existence of this long-forgotten branch of the human race, which may have contributed to the gene pool of the continent's modern inhabitants. If the discovery in Australia is confirmed, it will have enormous implications for the entire history of humanity. It means that Homo sapiens may not have been the only human species that was able to colonize the entire world. It means that the history of the settlement of the continents is much more complex and confusing than we imagine. It means that we may find traces of other ancient populations in other parts of the world that will also overturn our ideas about the past. Ultimately, this discovery is not just a footprint in the sand. It is a footprint in history, and it makes us think about who we are and where we came from. Perhaps we are not the only descendants of ancient hominins, and perhaps there are many more amazing discoveries waiting for us in the depths of time. This discovery forces us to rethink the entire migration model known as out of Africa. If the footprints belong to another population, it means that ancient hominins had more developed cognitive abilities than we had assumed, including the ability to travel by sea. This could lead to a revision of history and anthropology textbooks. Moreover, it raises the question of what happened to these archaic populations. Were they assimilated by Homo sapiens? Did they die out due to climate change? Or were they wiped out? The answer to this question could give us new insights into the dynamics of interaction between different human species. Thus, the footprints in our Karen are not just a mystery, but a key to understanding our own past, which, as it turns out, is much more complex and fascinating than we thought. So, these 100,000-year-old footprints in Australia are either a sensational discovery that changes history or a unique geological phenomenon. This dilemma highlights how fragile our ideas about the past can be. Every new artifact, every new dating can call long-accepted theories into question. In the case of the Archaeological footprints, we see how a single discovery can overturn the entire chronology of the continent's settlement, sparking heated debate among scientists. Which of these two options seems more plausible to you? Share your opinion in the comments, and if you want us to talk about other mysterious archaeological finds, such as the Antikythera mechanism or the Ica stone, write about it under this video, and we will definitely make an episode about it.